Hey, everyone. Hello. This lecture is called The Kingdom of Mande. And what I'm hoping to do here is set you up on some of the cultural background that will be useful for you as you make your way through the book, Sunjata. Um, I usually use a different version of this book by D.T. Nyan, and it's out of print, so I can't get it. So hopefully you're able to find a copy of the story. Um, Probably the thing that you've already gleaned is that this this novel that we're reading, is a little bit like if you think about like Beowulf or any of those big epics that were told in the Middle Ages by bards. So what is a bard? A bard is a person who uses music and oral history and shares stories, and frequently bards travel. They probably do other things too besides just being bards. um, in West Africa there is a similar tradition of specialists who memorize the history and then perform it at special times. So I have been to um, the village of Sunjata, which is located in Mali. And every year, it's called Kangaba. And every year they do this huge, a lot of tourists go. Um, Maybe they don't do it every year. It might be like every 7 years or something. And they do like a recitation of the story, and the story is super long. You can probably already tell, and depending on what version you hear, some of the little details can be different. Like in one version, I know they say that Sogalan, who's Sunjata's mom, was pregnant with him for 20 months, and then in another version they say 13 months. But it doesn't, that part doesn't matter so much as um, the fact that in all of the tellings about Sunjata, we're given to understand that he's extraordinary somehow. He's not just a regular guy, he's special. And so because of that, he is a culture hero. And here we are, what, like 1600 years later or something, and we're still telling stories about Sunjata. So um, is that right? Is that the right amount of time? Regardless, he's super important. So there's two pieces that will help you with this book. One is called Guidelines for Reading Sunjata. I hope you can see that. And it starts with a little bit of advice from me. It says, be patient. This epic is a little bit disorienting. One of the reasons it's disorienting is because it's a praise song. So I don't know if you've ever seen praise singing or seen this kind of thing performed. I do have a clip here to share with you. This might be a good time to go and look at that clip and then maybe come on back. But typically what happens is there's someone telling the story, the griot, the actually in and I've got a whole PowerPoint about this, so we're going to break all this down a little bit more. But the um, in Malenke, we call this person the Gelia. They're telling the story, and then typically they have like an apprentice or a helper, and so they're talking to each other. It's called call and response. And so the Gelia will say something like, I'm here today to tell you the story of Sunjata Keita. And then the person over here will say, yes, go ahead, yes, please continue, sing it, amen, that kind of thing. So there's this continual dynamic, not only between the praise singer and the praise singer's apprentice, because these people are in motion, they're moving around a group, they're at a party, but there's also call and response with the community. So it is an interactive telling of an epic story. And I spoke, I don't know, 25 years ago with an anthropologist in Mali who was collecting some of the narrative. And one of the things he said to me at the time, his name is Tom O'Toole. He retired now, but he wrote a lot about African
mande history. He said, you know, if you really want to understand mande culture, you have to understand the story of Sunjata because it's that significant to the way that the people think about themselves. Even to the point where um, in daily life, people will make references to elements of the story. It's a beloved story. It's a well-known story. It's a story that kind of unifies and shares culture. So I felt like this was a good place for us to start talking about African cultures. Now, keep in mind, as we have already said in all these other lectures, the African continent is immense. Certainly not the case that anyone you talk to in Africa is going to know this story. But if you talk to somebody who's Mande, that would be somebody who speaks Bamanan, somebody who speaks Malenke, somebody who speaks Jula, they will probably know elements of this story if they've been raised in the culture. It's just a tremendously popular story. The other thing to know is that at the heart of the story, it's not a romance. What? You know, in our country, man, you're hard pressed to find an epic story that doesn't include a romance. Are there any where there's not like some like boy meets girl, boy falls in love, boy loses girl kind of elements to the story? It's a very Western kind of story. Um, but there's no love triangle here. There's no like um central love character. I mean, we can assume Sunjata married, we can assume Sunjata had children, but um, his identity is not defined as a husband. His identity is defined in these other kinds of ways, including being a warrior, also messing a little bit with some witchcraft, doing battle with this evil king. But he also has a rivalry with his brother. And importantly, he and his brother share a father, but not mothers. So they're what we would call half brothers. That term, half brothers, that's our language. In Malenke or Mande languages, these guys would be called Fadinya, which means that they're half brothers who share a father. So, like I said, I've got a PowerPoint here, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds. But the central conflict in the story is about Sundiata doing battle against this guy called Sumero, who's a real powerful warlock, like a witch, like a shaman. Um, but it's not an easy rise to power for Sunjata because he also has this rivalry with a brother. And so this sibling rivalry is a common theme that we'll see in a lot of West African literature and historic um, stories. And yeah, let me go ahead and start my PowerPoint. The danger is I'll tell you everything on my PowerPoint and then we'll go through it and you'll be like, you already told us that. So the kingdom of Mande is established really, according to legend, at the end of this book. So this book is about the drawing together of the elements to have what comes to be known as the kingdom of Mali, or sometimes called the kingdom of Mande. And you can see here on this map, we've got an example, we've got the extent of the Mali Empire demonstrated. And so the countries that, you know, that we would think about today would be Guinea, a little bit of Burkina Faso, Mali, and then even going up here into what is today called Niger. These names on the map, these are still cities that exist. Gao is in Mali. Ouagadougou is in Burkina Faso. Djenné is, I think it might be a UNESCO site at this point. It has a lot of those old um, mosques that are made of sand. Well, they're made of mud brick. They're quite extraordinary. I can drop a photo and show you guys what those mosques look like. Let me remind myself to do that. And Nyoro is still there. Kangaba is here, and uh, that's where Sundiata was from. And Karusa is another important place where Sundiata spends a lot of his time, and that is in Guinea. And that I've been to both Kangaba and Karusa for some of these performances. There's another document in Blackboard that's called the Charter of Puro Kamfuga. And this is a document that uh, uh, many years ago, I was with a colleague called Ja, and we interviewed a griot, a Gelia, and we got these principles of essentially this is like the legal understanding that Sundiata brought to the Mali Empire. So when you see the Mali Empire, which was founded around 1300, some people say 1236, at that time, when Sundiata becomes the king or the ruler or the emperor, he implements these features. But again, before he becomes king, he has to exile the other warlock or warrior. So it's a pretty huge expanse. So what would be happening in the Mali Empire? Well, these would be people who would share a common language and also elements of a common culture. They would have probably lineages of people. There could be like intermarrying. There would be probably celebrations that would take place through here. These people would recognize them each other as being part of the same culture. Sometimes this part of the world, the Mali Empire contingent, is called the Bright Country. It's called that. Have you ever been to the American Southwest? And you know that the light there is what artists always talk about, isn't it? They talk about how everything is so bright because the soil reflects light. The soil has um, like mica in it, and it reflects light back. It's quite extraordinary. And so when you're there, you're like, oh, I wish I had my sunglasses. Also, there's not a lot of trees. Remember, this is the Sahel, so there's some trees. That tree in that top picture there, that big giant mighty tree, that's called a baobab tree. That does figure into the story, the baobab tree. And it, most of the vegetation is like what you see here. It's low, it's bush-like, it's scrubby. We're not talking about a forest environment here. We're talking about essentially that buffer between the rainforest and the Sahara Desert. So a lot of times people refer to this as the bright country. It's got that kind of quality of light and airiness, openness. And you can see here on this map, the Sahel actually runs right across the continent. It is wider in some places than others. Those of you who are interested in environmental issues would probably be interested to know that the Sahel is actually shrinking as the desert encroaches. So there is increasing aridification, especially in Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan, where places that formerly were farmed are just sort of like puffing up and blowing away because um, the kind of environmental changes that are happening with changes in the amount of rainfall, these sort of like global climactic changes are really taking a toll on the people who live in this part of the world. There was a very significant famine, I want to say 2 years ago, in Niger and Chad, and a lot of people died. So the other thing to know is that there is a major river that runs through here, kind of like the mighty Mississippi. It's called the Niger River. And the place that river carves out is called the Beladougou Plateau. And of course, there's also an area here, the Sahara Desert that we've mentioned before. That would be north of all of these sites that are indicated on this map. This particular map is trying to show trade routes within the Mali Empire that were all about um, gold. And so people would cross the Sahara. They'd start up here in Egypt, if you can just see, like in the upper right hand corner of our screen, and they would cross the Sahara Desert and they would come here for gold, which they would then take with them back to Saudi Arabia, India, Egypt. So there's also, I believe I've mentioned him one other time, Mansa Musa, who's an important character in this history. He's a descendant of Sunjata, and he takes a pilgrimage to Mecca in the 1300s. So about 100 years after Sunjata unites the Mali Empire, and he's very, very wealthy. All that gold will do it for you. So just to kind of get yourself grounded. Now, villages, the way we're going to be talking about villages in this book are what people live in. People get organized into groups that are essentially extended families. And so sometimes you might have 2 or 3 extended families living together, or sometimes it's just one extended family. An extended family, a lineage, is what's called a jamu. You can think of it as like a last name, right? My last name is Kenny. And so when I meet other people named Kenny, at some point back in the past, our people were together, probably there in Western Ireland. But the way that people orient their lives in Mande society, obviously less and less so today, but during this period of time that we're talking about where Sunjata's living, lineage was very important. A lot of the opportunities that you would have would be determined by your extended kin network. And we also say that these villages are headed by the eldest male of the lineage. And that guy is called the Dugutigi. So Dugu means village, and Tigi means head. So the Dugutigi is the head of the village, and he's the political leader. But listen, he's not really like the mayor. He's more like everybody's big brother, granddad too, right? He's like a big man in the way that, if you are familiar with the idea of big man theory that we talk about in some other anthropology classes. He's a guy who has a lot of social obligations to a lot of people. And he's looking out for the best interest of these people, because they're not just his village. It's not just his political group. It's his family. The other thing to note is that people are also dependent on one another in terms of economics. People are relying on each other to carry the weight of the rest if there's a bad year, or if something happens with your field. Maybe there's someone who can help you out. In the 11th century, when Sunjata is around, there was a lot of pastoralism in the area as well. Pastoralism is when people have livestock that they move around with. And there's lots of pastoralist groups across Africa, even today. There continue to be pastoralists in West Africa. Ethnically, though, they're quite distinct. They don't speak the same language. They don't practice the same religion, typically. Honestly, today, because of conversions, a lot of times they do. But at least historically, they did not. They don't, at least they didn't intermarry. They are, to be quite honest, frequently rivals, and they have conflict with one another. And it kind of makes sense. The Mande people are farmers. I probably haven't told you that yet, but they're farmers. They grow their food. So they stay put. You put seeds in the ground, you're sticking around waiting for that stuff to come up. But pastoralists have a different kind of strategy. They're migratory. They're mobile. And so imagine if there's like a bunch of mobile people with all their livestock kind of tromping through your village. No go, right? That's not cool. People don't like that. So one of the things that we find about these villages here's a picture of what the pastoralists look like, and some of them are coming out of the Sahara. But regardless, there's a lot of sun, so they do frequently have these kinds of very distinctive head wraps, um, that that kind of mark them as different from the Mande people. Mande people don't wear this kind of head wrap. Um, and you can see the kind of cattle they have here. It's called zebu cattle, or zebu, zebu. They're quite different from the cows we have here in Missouri. These guys can go a pretty long time without drinking. They tend to be a lot leaner. They have these massive horns. The horns are useful for a lot of things. And the people who have these cows, and by the way, when we look at East Africa, we're going to talk about pastoralists in East Africa. We're going to talk about the Maasai. But in West Africa, the pastoralists are called Fulani, or in their language, it's pronounced Fulbe. And so they move around quite a lot, and they have their own interesting cultural shape of their society, which is again quite different from what the Mande are. They have different subsistence strategies. They use the land differently. They have very different ideas about what it is to be a person. They have different ideas about what it is to be a husband, what it is to be a daughter. They're different cultures. So one of the things to just get in your mind is that the whole time that this is happening, there's also these Fulani people present. And the villages, the Mande villages, end up creating these little enclosures around them. They're doing the enclosures for a couple of different reasons. One reason you would enclose your village is because you want to mark the boundaries of your village. This is who we are. This is our village. And you want to have this integrity of culture of the people who live inside of it. But another reason to put a big wall around your village is to keep people out. Am I right? That's what the Great Wall of China was all about. So a lot of these farming villages that are Mande are creating these walls around them, and they grow, they accrete, and because some of them become quite large. And that was the case for Kongaba. That was also the case for Karusa. So when we enter into this story, at the point that Sunjata is being born, his father is actually a Dugatigi of a quite large kingdom. Now, keep in mind, these kingdoms are also kind of ethnic groups. They're also families, lineages, maybe several lineages linked together. And the people who are living within the village have obligations to the Dugatigi. When things are going pretty well, when the farmers are doing well, they are able to keep the pastoralists from coming up into their space. But there are times in history, and this is part of the reason why there's chaos at the time Sunjata's born. There are times when the alliances of farmers fall apart, and there's encroachment by herders. And again, it's not necessarily the case that these people hate each other. It's just that they do have conflicts, and for that reason, the cultures have mechanisms to try to manage the conflict. There on the right, that's a Fulani woman. I just wanted to make sure that you get a little chance to take a look at a Fulani woman. The thing to note here are her massive gold earrings. Fulani women wear their jewelry wealth on them, and even today, and you can often see these massive gold and silver earrings that are worn by Fulani women. The other thing to note is that because there is conflict, if you're living in a Dugatigi's kingdom, a larger village, then you are probably going to be asked to pay tribute to the king, the Dugatigi. You would be asked to, it's essentially a tax. It's a a way that you make sure that you are protected by the political clout or the alliances that your leader has. We're going to continue talking about what happens with tributary relationships, but it's something that's very important across Africa. It's the establishment of what we sometimes call patron-client relationships. Even today, if you're in West Africa and you really want to like celebrate a person or you want to compliment them, you would call them a patron, a patron, because that's a person who has lots of people under them. And that all the people who are the clients have obligations to pay to the patron. Again, think about big man systems and how they work. You have a person who has a lot of charisma, they have a lot of social networks, they have a lot of personal authority, and they're able to manage all of the pieces of the political life and the economic life. They make decisions, they mediate on behalf of other people. They do the things that a leader does. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on this because we have a whole week to talk about religion, but Islam has been practiced in Africa since about the year 900. So Islam is making its way into the world that Sundiata lives in. I've spoken to a number of griot about this, and some griot are willing to say, like, yes, Sundiata was Muslim. But most griot believe that Sundiata is not yet part of the Islamic world. Now, Mansa Musa definitely is, because remember, Mansa Musa is his like ancestor who, no, his progenitor, who ends up taking the pilgrimage from over here in West Africa all the way across the Sahara Desert to Mecca. Took him a long, long time. I think it took him 2 years. So you can see here that the spread of Islam is actually happening right around the time. It's just hard to say. And I've got a little link there to a John Green video. I don't know if you like him. He's got a whole little clip about Mansa Musa. I'll make sure that you get another clip of that, another link for that. But the whole point is that Islam is around, but we don't really know if the people in Sunjata's world are practicing Islam yet. And like I said, we're going to talk a lot more about religion in Africa. But it is the case that the indigenous beliefs could be existing around the same time as Islam is being introduced. And so what happens when two or more religions come together and create something new is called syncretism. I've spelled it wrong there at the top. It's S-Y-N. Man. It's so hard to look at your errors, isn't it? You're just like, oh, that's screechingly bad. I made a mistake here. Anyway, syncretism is when two or more religions come together and create something entirely new. So what I want to do here is I want to talk about some of the pre-Islamic religious ideas that the Mande kingdom has. Have you ever seen Star Wars, or do you know the Star Wars universe? I mean, you probably do. There's an idea in Star Wars that there's something called the Force, and that some people can use the Force and other people can't maybe use the Force, but everybody's affected by the Force. And the Force is like um, this spiritual energy that exists and animates life and allows things to happen. It's sort of like the medium that people move through. Mande people also believe in something like the Force. They call this force Nyama. So Nyama is the idea that everything has life force energy that can be tapped into by a practitioner who knows what they're doing. Here we've got my favorite practitioner of all time. So everything in the world that you can see or that you can perceive is animated by nyama. And that means that people have nyama too. Do you remember before when we talked about Jamu? Oh, let me come back to that. Jamu is a lineage. Mande society believes that different lineages have access to different kind of nyama energy. So the elites, the people that Sunjata is, have a certain kind of access to nyama. They have the nyama of basically action. And the Jelia or the griots that I was, the people who write the story have the nyama of language or words. They can make magic with words. There's also a whole category of people who live in Mande societies who belong to different last names who are called the Nyamakala. So these are people who have learned some kind of magic energy. And depending on your last name, depending on your lineage, you would be privy to a certain kind of like sacred or secret knowledge. This is important. There's a lot happening in Mande society that's specialist knowledge. It's not available for everybody to know about, but everybody knows something. And one of the things that holds the fabric of the society together is that everybody's nyama works together to optimize the society. I've got this great book here that was edited a few years ago by Dave Conrad and Barbara Frank. It's called Identity and Status, or Status and Identity in West Africa. And then if you can see the subtitle there, it's called Nyamakala of Mali or Mande. There's a number of different kinds of Nyamakala. Do I have it? Okay. So just hold that in your head. The other thing that happens, so everybody has a jamu, everybody has a lineage, but the other thing that happens in Mande society is that people are getting born, people are dying, and you get born, like let's say you get born in the spring of, uh, 2003. Everybody else who's born in the spring of 2003 becomes part of a kind of an age set with you. And so as you go through your life, as you pass these different rites of passage toward becoming an adult, you're doing that with a bunch of other people. Now, some of these people are going to be part of your jamu. They're going to be related to you by blood. And other people are going to be of other lineages. So there's kind of two ways that the society is being organized. One is by blood or through lineage, and the other is by age. So every single Mande person has these two really important indexes of identity that give them specialized knowledge. The secret societies are taught how to be adult people in stages. So what would happen is, when you're getting ready to have, a rite of passage into adolescence, the young people are separated from the rest of the group and they are taught special knowledge, and then they are initiated into the group. Each set of initiates forms kind of like a different set of a secret society. So for example here, remember a few lectures ago, I was showing you a bunch of pictures of the dance of the Dununba. It's also sometimes called the dance de Durga in a village called Baro. I've got that there on the right. These would be young men who would be age mates. And at certain rituals, at certain ceremonies, the men of a certain set are being called on to come out and perform together. It's a little bit like if you think about, when you started high school, you started high school with a whole group of people who were called freshmen. And then you sort of progressed through high school together, didn't you? And then you all graduated at the same time. But there might have been different points where like all the sophomores were called together to do something, or all the juniors were called together to do something. That's how a secret society works. There's, depending on which age set you belong to, and an age set is called a ton, Ton. So you have a different kind of set of responsibilities and a certain set of obligations. So you've got your jamu, which trains you to have a particular kind of occupation because you have a special kind of nyama energy. Everybody in your family is really good with this kind of magic. And everyone in your secret society has a certain set of knowledges. So young people, here's another example of what goes on at one of these ceremonies. This one is called the Fête de la Mar. I've already shared some of these pictures with you, but it's when the rains come and everybody goes to this big lake, and then there's a kind of a race to catch the most fish. I also want to direct you to a really excellent video, and I know that there's a link for you there in Blackboard. But when people come together and they're having these celebrations, the way that they celebrate is going to be organized by their family lineage and also by their age. So the other thing to note is that you're part of an age grade as you go through your life. But even when people die, they're still present for the mande. They become the ancestors. And so the ancestors are still there. They have a responsibility to look out for these people that they have bequeathed, right? So they so in mande life, there's nyama energy among the living, but there's also an energy that connects people to those who have come before. And so sometimes this is known as ancestor worship. It's also a really common feature in animism. And it's something that we will see over and over and over in all of our examinations of Africa this summer. The other thing to note is that it's not like people are praying to the ancestors to actually do hard things. People themselves know that they're going to be doing hard things, but what they do is they ask the ancestors to intercede on their behalf, and they do this through sacrifice. So it involves like a ritual set of prayers and also songs. Do you see here where there's this kind of emphasis that's being placed in mande life on communication? The griot is a very important communicator, and people themselves are being arranged and organized into groups so that they have people who have like the same interests and the same kinds of knowledges as they do. And then there's this tremendous emphasis that's being placed on maintaining good contact with the ancestors who are constantly present. Now, after the ancestors, we've got the elders. Mande society is gerontocratic, which is to say the political leadership is by the oldest, and the ancestors are the closest intermediaries to the ancestors and also to this notion of the creator, kind of like God, but also a little bit like, so God isn't necessarily worried about people in this world. This is kind of like more of a God that set things in motion, kind of like a deist notion of a God, and then sort of steps back and lets the people do their thing. The elders, are very highly respected because they've been through a lot of these rituals. And they've had a lot of these sacrifices. They've done them. They've sacrificed to the elders. If you make it to be an elder, you obviously have done some things right. And so older people are given a great deal of respect and authority, even down into the way that kinship is recognized. So that when somebody would introduce me to their brother, they wouldn't just say, like, this is my brother. They would always say, this is my older brother, or this is my younger brother. Because age, remember, because of those age sets and those secret societies, age is an index of who you are as a person. And I talk about in other classes, and I think we'll do a little bit in this class about the significance of initiation, the significance of a rite of passage. Essentially, what happens when a person is initiated is they transform their identity from one status to another status. I've got a couple of lectures here coming up on personhood, and we'll talk about this more. But those initiations are not just like moments on a calendar. They're also moments when people's whole identities are transformed. So one of the things that we find in Sunjata is that he has this very close friend who is actually his griot, and they are part of the same age class. And so we'll see throughout the epic that these young men who have been initiated together have a lot of loyalty to one another. Now, there's also the idea of sorcery. So everybody in mande society has some access to supernatural energy called nyama, but some people take on specialized knowledge and can actually kind of activate the energy more. Maybe we think about these as like the Jedi, right? And then we've already mentioned Islam before, and that's all about Mansa Musa. We've already talked about the chiefdoms, and we've already started talking about Jamu. So the Jamu is that lineage, the idea of who's your last name, and the way that people have work, the way that people figure out what work they do has to do with their lineage. So pretty much everybody farms. Most of the time, people farm and do something else in addition. So they've got like their field and they're working their field, but then they also have like these other kinds of tasks that they do. So everybody does a farming, but your Jamu also determines the caste that you fall in. So some lineages have more status than other lineages. Some lineages are called on to do different kinds of work than other lineages. So I've already mentioned before the griot, that's the second one on there. But there's also a category of people known as blacksmiths. These are people who work the forge. These are people who can deal with fire. Their special nyama has to do with fire. So it's believed that the people who are part of a blacksmith lineage are the best suited to do blacksmithing work because their nyama energy is closely aligned with fire. It's a little bit like if you follow the zodiac and you know people who are earth signs, and earth signs tend to be kind of um, like homemakers, domestic, like kind of comfy people, as opposed to like air signs who are like travelers, or fire signs who are known for being very passionate. It's just this idea that certain groups of people have certain kinds of temperaments. Now, does every single blacksmith love working on fire? No, probably not. I mean, these are just categories. Leather workers are people who work with animal energy. Where do you get leather? You get it from hides. Pottery makers are people who have like kind of an earth energy. They're working with clay. Hunters and fishermen also have an animal energy, but a different kind of wild animals, not domestic animals. Like, so, stuff that's out there in the bush. I know before when we talked about Sierra Leone and we talked about the sort of that Robert Kaplan article, I mentioned the dozo to you, the hunters. And then there's also a category of people who are slaves. And again, this is different from plantation slavery. These are not slaves for life. These are people who have either temporarily lost their freedom or have been captured in war. But let's talk about the griot, because the griot are one of these castes. And I said before, the magic, the nyama that runs through the griot is the magic of language, words, word energy, spells. Sunjata's griot in this story that you read is Bala Fasake, and he's an important advisor to Sunjata, and he's an important confidant. And we always see in mande oral history that if there's a noble family or an elite family, the Keitas are noble elites. There is also this group of griot families that work close to them. So it's a it's a relationship that is forged over the course of these men's lives, but it's also kind of a spiritual relationship, and it's also kind of an economic relationship, and it's also very clearly a political relationship. The griots are the orators who tell the people what the king has said. The griot is the person who speaks, and the noble is the person who acts. And so you can imagine that this actually sets up a pretty interesting dynamic between these two groups of people who are kind of united and need each other. They both need the role the other plays. We're going to talk a lot more about gender and gender roles across Africa, but you might be wondering, what does gender mean in terms of the Nyamakala? Well, blacksmith lineages, it's mostly men who work the forge, but there would be women who were related to them by blood, and those women also would have that blacksmith nyama. And so these are women who frequently are midwives. They go to births because anything that's associated with sexuality is sort of symbolically coded in Mande as hot. Isn't that funny? Because I think we have that word in our culture too, that concept of like hot sexuality. So, so births and also excisions are done by blacksmith family people. The other thing to note is that Mande society is polygynous. That means that men take more than one wife at the same time, and that frequently marriages are arranged according to like diplomatic purposes, so that people would be arranging their children to get married to people from other castes. No, you'll only marry within your caste, but people within a caste could maybe be looking to try to create alliances with groups of people who live, on the other side of the river or something like that. I'll say this probably so many times this summer, but you cannot underestimate the significance of kinship. Everybody in Mande society is connected to a Jamu, a lineage. They're part of a family. And also remember, this whole thing about secret societies and this thing about age grades means that everybody also is being ranked according to their birth. So you've got first sons and second sons and third sons and fourth sons. And that stuff is really significant because that is how people figure out what's going to happen in the future. Who's going to have access to land? Who's going to have access to water rights? Who's going to be asked to go and travel and do some kind of like diplomatic mission? Who's going to be asked to wait their turn and not get a wife this time because somebody else's little brother really needs to get a wife because somebody's baby just died? Everybody is constantly thinking about their role vis-a-vis the family. And here also I have a slide about slavery. Definitely slavery is not a great thing. Nobody wants to be a John. But again, remember, in a climate where we have patron-client relations, and we also have a climate where there is continual conflict, it is possible that people will lose their freedom at different times. The kings, the Dugatigis, work in consultation with Dugatigis from other places. And like I said before, one of the reasons that we get the sort of fracturing that's happening at the beginning of this book is because there's been this massive incursion by pastoralist peoples. And so there's a real disruption to the way that things were meant to be. Okay, I hope that sets you up to start reading. You've also got, take a look at the Charter of Kurukanfaga. I remember it was so hot the day we recorded this. Jesus, I can't even tell you. It was so hot. And then also, take a look at my study sheet here, which I cribbed from a friend of mine from, I don't know, a decade or so ago. And I have um, been making slight adjustments to it ever since. I really need to go through and reorient it to this version of the story, because sometimes the spellings of the names have changed. So here's what I'd really like for you to do with this book. Read the introduction. It's what is it, like 32 pages or something. So read the introduction and then take a look at the way that the text is written. It's written like a song, it's like lyrics. And a lot of it is just super repetitive. You'll see that there's a lot of stuff here about Jammu. It says the Taraware's surname is Tiramakang. The surname Dambale is Tiramakang. The surname Jabate is Tiramakang. The surname Job is Tiramakang. The surname Juf is Tiramakang. Okay, what's Tiramakang? Oh, well, that's one of the Nyamakala. So the different occupational castes, what they're doing here is they're telling you people's last names, and then they're telling you what those people do for a living. It's all super organized, right? When I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali, and I roll up, I'm 27 years old, my name is Erin Kenny, there's no way to put me in a Jammu. There's no Kenny Jammu. So what ended up happening, and what they do as a convention for Peace Corps volunteers in Mali and Guinea and Burkina Faso and Mauritania and Niger, is they adopt you into a family. And I was adopted into a family of blacksmiths. My Malian name, my pretend name was Jenaba. That was my first name, Jenaba. People just called me Jenna. And my last name is Kone. So I am part of a blacksmith lineage. And wherever I would go and I would meet people in the market or whatever, they would say, what's your name? And I would say Jennifer Kone. And now we have a relationship because like maybe their last name is Traore. And now they're like, hey, you're from my same Yamakala. My kids can marry your kids, this kind of way. Like there's a kind of an energy, like a social fabric that's held together by those Jammu, which organize people according to lineage, and also by your age set, which organize people according to age. Okay, I got another lecture where we're going to talk about the dynamics of kinship. We'll talk more about polygyny. We'll talk more about being somebody's half brother or half sister. But that's probably enough for this lecture. I hope you're doing great. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.